My wife borrowed $200,000 from my retired father. She told him it was for a business investment. She told me the same thing. What she didn't tell either of us was that every single dollar went straight to the man she was sleeping with. My father worked 40 years for that money, and I spent the next 14 months making sure every cent came back, with interest. My name is Thomas Reed. I'm 41 years old, and I work as a structural engineer in Charlotte, North Carolina. I design buildings for a living, bridges, commercial structures, the kind of work that requires you to account for every variable, to trust nothing you haven't personally verified, and to understand that the difference between a sound structure and a catastrophic failure often comes down to details that look insignificant until they aren't. I tell you this because it matters. Because the man who missed what was happening in his own home for nearly 2 years was the same man who spent every working day thinking carefully about hidden weaknesses and structural integrity. That contradiction has not been lost on me. I have sat with it long enough to stop being surprised by it and simply accept it as a fact about how betrayal works. It almost always comes from the direction you're not looking. Diana and I had been married for 7 years when everything collapsed. We met in our early 30s. She was working in event planning at the time, good at it, genuinely creative and socially gifted in a way I am not naturally and have always admired. We dated for 2 years, got married in a small ceremony outside of Asheville, bought a house in a quiet neighborhood in South Charlotte with a yard Diana immediately began planning a garden for. The garden never quite happened. That should have told me something in retrospect. Diana was excellent at envisioning things and less consistent at the patient work of maintaining them. But that is hindsight, and hindsight is the most useless of all the analytical tools. For the first 4 years, the marriage was good. Not extraordinary. We were 2 working adults building a life with the ordinary friction of 2 different temperaments sharing space and money and future plans. But solid. Real. I believed in it. The business idea emerged in year 5. Diana had left event planning by then and moved through 2 other positions. A marketing role at a local firm, then a brief attempt at freelance consulting, before landing on what she described as her real calling. She wanted to launch a lifestyle brand. Curated home goods, she said. Sustainable, design-forward, targeted at the Charlotte market initially and expandable from there. I was not dismissive. I want to be clear about that. I asked the questions a structural engineer asks: what are the load-bearing elements, where are the weak points, what does the timeline look like, what happens if the first phase underperforms? Diana had answers for all of them, some more convincing than others, and I ultimately supported her because she was my wife and it was her dream, and I believed that counted for something. What I did not know, what I had no knowledge of until 14 months ago, was that the business plan had been developed in close collaboration with a man named Brandon Cole. Brandon Cole. Remember that name. He presented himself as a business consultant, websites, LinkedIn profile, the full professional architecture of legitimacy. He had apparently connected with Diana at a networking event 18 months before I ever heard his name. By the time Diana brought the business idea to me, Brandon Cole had been her business advisor for the better part of a year. He had also, as I later discovered, been her lover for approximately the same amount of time. The loan request came from Diana on a Thursday evening in March. She had done the research, she said. She had a detailed business plan. I saw it, it was thorough and well presented. She had identified a funding gap of $200,000 for the first phase of launch. She had approached 2 banks. Both had declined, citing insufficient business history and collateral. She had a proposal. My father, Frank Reed, was 70 years old and recently retired after 4 decades as a high school history teacher in Greensboro. He was not a wealthy man, but he was a careful one. 40 years of modest salary managed with the particular discipline of someone who understood that security is built slowly and can be lost quickly. His retirement savings were approximately $340,000. His house was paid off. He lived simply and within his means. Diana proposed asking my father for a personal loan of $200,000 to be repaid with 6% interest over 5 years, documented with a formal promissory note. I was uncomfortable immediately, not with the amount, though the amount was significant, but with the source. My father's retirement savings were not investment capital. They were the accumulated result of 40 years of work by a man with no fallback position. Losing that money would not be an inconvenience. It would be a catastrophe. I said all of this to Diana. She had answers for all of it. The promissory note made it legally binding. The business plan was sound. The repayment timeline was conservative. She had run the numbers 3 times. She had run them with Brandon Cole, though she didn't mention that part. My father, when Diana presented it to him over dinner at our house the following weekend, was characteristically thoughtful. He asked good questions. He reviewed the business plan carefully. He looked at Diana, this woman his son had chosen, who had sat at his table at every Thanksgiving for 7 years, and he said yes, because he trusted her, because she was family. The money was transferred in 2 installments over 6 weeks. My father moved it from his retirement account, taking the tax penalty for early withdrawal because the timeline required it, and deposited it into the joint business account Diana had opened for the venture. I watched all of this happen and felt the low, persistent discomfort of a man who has reservations he cannot fully articulate. I told myself I was being overly cautious. I told myself Diana had earned the benefit of the doubt. I told myself that supporting your spouse's ambitions sometimes means accepting a level of risk that makes you uncomfortable. I signed the promissory note as a co-guarantor, which meant that if the business failed, the repayment obligation fell to me personally. I did not look closely enough at the business account statements in the months that followed. Diana managed the business finances. I managed our household finances. That was the division we had established, and I had not questioned it. That was my mistake, the only one I'm willing to own in this entire story. Because 14 months ago, on a Sunday afternoon when Diana was visiting a friend and I was looking for a household insurance document in the filing cabinet, I opened the wrong folder and found 6 months of business account statements. I sat down at the kitchen table and read through every page. In the 14 months since the initial deposit, $194,000 of the $200,000 loan had been transferred out of the business account. Not to vendors, not to suppliers, not to any of the business expenses outlined in Diana's plan, to a personal account belonging to Brandon Cole Consulting LLC. I closed the folder. I set it on the table. I looked at the kitchen Diana had designed, the marble countertops she had chosen, the pendant lights she had researched for weeks, and I understood, with the specific clarity of a structural engineer looking at a building that has been compromised at its foundation, exactly what I was dealing with. I picked up my phone. I did not call Diana. I called my father. My father picked up on the second ring. He had that quality of retired people who answer their phones promptly, no longer conditioned by the constant interruptions of a working life to let calls go to voicemail. He answered, and his voice was warm and easy the way it always was on a Sunday afternoon. "Tom," he said, "everything okay? I need to ask you something," I said. "About the loan." A pause. Not long, half a second, maybe, but I had been listening to my father's pauses my entire life, and this one had something in it. "What about it?" he said. "Have you received any repayments yet?" I said, "Any at all?" The promissory note had specified quarterly payments beginning 6 months after the initial transfer. We were now 14 months in. 3 payments should have been made. My father was quiet for a moment longer than he should have been. "Diana said the first phase took longer than expected," he said carefully. "She told me payments would begin next quarter. She said you knew." I looked at the kitchen ceiling. "I didn't know," I said. Another pause. This one heavier. "Tom, Dad," I said, "I'm going to fix this. I need you to trust me and not contact Diana yet. Can you do that?" He said yes. His voice, when he said it, was the voice of a man who had just understood that something he had tried not to suspect was probably true. I hated that I had caused that. I hated it completely. I called a lawyer Monday morning. His name was Greg Sutton, a civil litigation attorney in Charlotte with a background in financial fraud cases. I had found him through a colleague who had used him in a contract dispute and described him as methodical and relentless in equal measure. I sat in his office and laid out everything I had. The business account statements, the transfer records, the promissory note, the timeline. Greg read through the documents without speaking. When he finished, he looked up. "Brandon Cole Consulting LLC," he said. "Do you know anything about this entity beyond the name?" "Not yet," I said. "That's part of why I'm here." "I have a researcher I use for exactly this kind of background work," he said. "Give me 48 hours. He called me Wednesday afternoon. Brandon Cole had 2 prior civil judgments against him in Georgia and South Carolina, both for fraudulent misrepresentation in business consulting arrangements. Both cases had resulted in settlements. Neither had resulted in criminal charges, because the victims had prioritized recovering money over pursuing prosecution. He had been operating in Charlotte for 3 years. Diana was, in all likelihood, not his first. "This changes things significantly," Greg said. "The civil claim against your wife for breach of fiduciary duty is straightforward given the documentation. But Brandon Cole's pattern of behavior across multiple states opens the door to federal wire fraud charges. That means the FBI." "Good," I said. The next 4 weeks moved with a quiet, building momentum that I found, in a strange way, steadying. Greg filed a civil fraud claim against Diana and Brandon Cole jointly, citing the unauthorized diversion of loan funds, breach of the promissory note terms, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Simultaneously, he contacted the FBI field office in Charlotte and presented Brandon Cole's multi-state pattern of behavior. The FBI was interested. More than interested. It turned out Brandon Cole had been on their radar for 18 months in connection with a broader investigation into investment fraud targeting small business owners across the Southeast. Our documentation, clean, detailed, time-stamped, was exactly the kind of concrete evidence they needed to move forward. Diana was served on a Thursday morning at the house we shared. I was not there when it happened. I had moved into a temporary apartment 2 weeks prior, after consulting with Greg about the strategic wisdom of remaining in a shared residence during active litigation. The process server called Greg's office to confirm service at 10:22 in the morning. Diana called me 47 times that day. I answered once at 7 in the evening because Greg had advised that complete silence could be used against me. "Thomas." Her voice was fractured in a way I had not heard before. Please just let me explain." "Greg Sutton's number is in your contacts," I said. "Everything goes through him." "Thomas." "Diana," I said quietly. "My father worked 40 years for that money." I let that sit for a moment. Then I hung up. The civil case moved faster than I expected. Greg had warned me that financial fraud litigation could drag. Opposing attorneys filing delays, requesting extensions, burying proceedings in procedural complexity until the plaintiff exhausts their resources or their patience. He had seen it happen many times. He wanted me prepared for a long road. What he hadn't fully accounted for was the FBI's involvement changing the terrain entirely. When federal investigators are actively building a wire fraud case against a defendant, that defendant's attorney suddenly becomes very motivated to resolve parallel civil proceedings quickly and quietly. A civil settlement doesn't preclude federal prosecution. The 2 tracks run independently, but it does reduce the total surface area of exposure. Brandon Cole's attorney understood this immediately. Diana's attorney understood it too. The first settlement meeting happened 5 weeks after service. Diana arrived with her attorney, a woman named Susan Park who had a reputation for aggressive negotiation and had clearly been briefed on the strength of our documentation. Diana herself looked like someone who had not slept properly in weeks. She was thinner than I remembered, which was only 3 weeks ago, and she was holding herself with the careful rigidity of a person managing something they cannot afford to let show. She looked at me when I walked in. I gave her what I had given her on the phone. Nothing useful. Not coldness, not anger. Just the face of a man who has made his decisions and is here to conclude a process. Greg opened with the full documentation. Every transfer, every date, every dollar that had moved from the business account to Brandon Cole Consulting LLC. The promissory note, the missed payments, the FBI referral and its implications. Susan Park had clearly seen all of it before. She was prepared. But prepared and positioned to win are different things, and she knew the difference. Their opening offer was a repayment of $140,000, 70% of the diverted funds, structured over 3 years, with Diana retaining the house and her personal assets. Greg set the document down. "The full $200,000, he said, plus the contractual 6% interest accrued to date, plus documented legal costs. structured over 18 months, not 3 years, secured against the marital home. Susan pushed back. Expected. Greg reminded her, pleasantly, that the alternative was allowing the civil case to proceed to trial, at which point Brandon Cole's prior judgments in Georgia and South Carolina would be entered into evidence, establishing a pattern that reflected directly on Diana's knowledge of and participation in the scheme. Susan asked for a recess. The recess lasted 30 minutes. I sat in the hallway outside the conference room on a wooden bench and looked at the floor and thought about my father. He had called me every Sunday since our conversation, not to ask about the case, not to express anger or fear, just to talk. About the garden he was finally getting around to planting. About a history book he was reading. About the neighbor's dog that kept digging under his fence. He never mentioned the money directly. That was his way, not avoidance exactly, more the particular dignity of a man who has decided that worrying aloud accomplishes nothing and that his son is handling it. I was going to handle it. The recess ended. Susan Park returned with a revised position. Full repayment of $200,000. Interest calculated at 6% from the date of initial transfer. Legal costs covered up to a defined cap. Secured against the marital home, to be sold within 90 days with proceeds applied directly to the settlement obligation. Diana would walk away from the marriage with her car, her personal belongings, and approximately $60,000 in personal savings that Greg had verified were not derived from the diverted funds. It was not everything I had asked for. The legal cost cap left a gap of approximately $8,000 that I would absorb personally. I looked at Greg across the table. He gave me the slight nod of a man who has assessed the terrain and finds it acceptable. Yes, I said. Brandon Cole's situation resolved differently. The FBI case moved on its own timeline, independent of the civil proceedings, and I was not a central party to it. More a contributing witness, one piece of a larger picture the federal investigators had been assembling across multiple states and multiple victims. What I know is this: 6 months after Diana's civil settlement was signed, Brandon Cole was indicted on 7 counts of wire fraud affecting victims in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. The total amount across all victims was approximately $1.4 million. Diana was not indicted. The investigators determined that she had been simultaneously a participant in the diversion of my father's money and a victim of Brandon Cole's broader scheme, that he had manipulated her deliberately and that her culpability, while real, did not rise to the criminal threshold they were pursuing. I did not disagree with that assessment, though I sat with it carefully for a while. Diana had made choices, real ones with real consequences for real people. The fact that Brandon Cole had used her as a tool did not erase those choices. But it did complicate the simple narrative of villain and victim, and I was not going to pretend otherwise just because it would be more satisfying. The marital home sold in 61 days, faster than the 90-day window in the settlement agreement. The proceeds, after realtor fees and the remaining mortgage balance, came to $247,000. $200,000 plus accrued interest, $218,400 in total, was wire transferred directly to my father's account on a Tuesday morning in October. Greg called me when the confirmation came through. "It's done," he said. I sat in my car in the parking garage outside my office building and looked at the concrete wall in front of me for a moment. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." "You did the work," Greg said. "I just organized it." I drove to Greensboro that afternoon. My father was in the backyard when I arrived, actually gardening this time, the garden he had been talking about for months finally taking shape in the late October light. He looked up when he heard the gate and straightened slowly, the way men in their 70s straighten, with the careful acknowledgement of what their bodies now require. I told him it was done. I told him the full amount was in his account. He looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded once, slow, definitive, and looked back at his garden. "Stay for dinner," he said. "Yes," I said. I sat on his back porch while he finished what he was doing, the afternoon light going golden over the yard, and felt the specific exhale of a man who has carried something heavy for a long time and has finally, completely set it down. My father made pot roast that evening. It was his standard Sunday dinner, the one he had made every week for as long as I could remember. the smell of it so deeply embedded in my memory of childhood that walking into his kitchen and finding it on the stove felt like a specific kind of coming home. He moved around the kitchen with the unhurried efficiency of a man who has made the same meal hundreds of times and finds comfort in the repetition rather than tedium. I sat at the kitchen table and watched him cook, and we talked about ordinary things. The garden, the history book he was reading, something about the American Civil War, a topic he returned to periodically with the enthusiasm of a man who had taught it for decades and still found new angles in it. The neighbor's dog, which had apparently escalated its fence-digging campaign to a level requiring intervention. We did not talk about Diana. We did not talk about Brandon Cole or Greg Sutton or the 14 months of legal proceedings that had just concluded. My father had a gift, one I had observed my entire life and only fully appreciated now, for knowing when a thing was finished and treating it accordingly. The money was back. The case was closed. Continuing to examine it served no purpose he could identify, so he simply didn't. I found that wisdom more useful than I could easily express. Over dinner he asked me, with the careful casualness of a man raising something he has been holding for a while, how I was doing. Not about the case. Not about Diana. Just how was I doing? I thought about it honestly, the way he had always expected me to answer him. Strange, I said. Like a project that took everything you had and then finished, and now you're standing in the empty space where it used to be. He nodded slowly. That's a reasonable place to be, he said. I keep running through the things I missed, I said. The signs I didn't read. I'm an engineer. I build things designed to catch failure before it happens. And I missed 2 years of it happening in my own house. My father set down his fork. He looked at me with the particular attention he had always given to things he considered worth saying carefully. You know what I taught for 40 years, he said. History, I said. I taught people who made decisions with the information they had at the time, he said. Not the information they would have later. Not the information someone else had and didn't share with them. What they knew when they knew it. He picked his fork back up. You trusted your wife. That was a reasonable thing to do. What she did with that trust was her failure, not yours. I looked at my father across the dinner table. This man who had worked 40 years and saved carefully and handed over his retirement savings to a woman his son had chosen, because she was family and he trusted her, and had said almost nothing when it nearly disappeared. I'm sorry, Dad, I said, for all of it. He waved his hand once. A small, definitive gesture that I recognized from childhood as his way of closing a door on something. It came back, he said simply. That's what matters. The divorce was finalized 4 months after the civil settlement. North Carolina has a mandatory 1-year separation requirement before a divorce can be granted. A fact Greg had informed me of early in the process, which meant that the legal end of the marriage ran on a longer timeline than the financial resolution. I had been living in the apartment for 14 months by the time the decree was signed. It was, after everything, a quiet conclusion. The major asset, the house, had already been sold and its proceeds distributed. The remaining division of personal property was handled through attorneys with minimal conflict, possibly because Diana understood the full scope of what she had participated in and had no appetite for prolonged adversarial proceedings. I have not spoken to Diana since the evening I answered her call and told her my father had worked 40 years for that money. I don't know exactly where she is now. A mutual friend mentioned, without my asking, that she had moved to Raleigh. I filed that information the way you file information that has no practical relevance to your life. Noted, set aside, not returned to. I want to say something about Brandon Cole because I think it matters. His federal trial concluded 8 months after his indictment. 7 counts of wire fraud. 12 victims across 3 states. $1.4 million in total damages. He was convicted on 6 of the 7 counts. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to all 12 victims, a process that his attorney argued would take years given his current financial position, which was apparently considerably less impressive than his LinkedIn profile had suggested. I received a letter from the FBI victim liaison informing me of the outcome. I read it once, put it in a folder, and closed the folder. I felt no particular satisfaction. Not because justice hadn't been served, it had, clearly and formally, but because satisfaction implies that something has been restored to its original condition. Nothing about the last 14 months had restored anything to its original condition. It had simply concluded. There is a difference. I have learned to understand it. Last spring, I drove up to Greensboro on a Saturday morning to help my father with the garden. It had grown considerably since October. He had been working on it steadily through the winter and into spring with the patient consistency of a man who understands that things worth having require sustained attention. There were raised beds along the back fence, a section of perennial herbs near the kitchen door, and a row of tomato plants that he was clearly more invested in than anything else. We worked through the morning without talking much. That was comfortable. My father and I have always been able to share silence without filling it unnecessarily, which is rarer than people acknowledge. Around noon, he went inside to make lunch, and I sat on the back porch steps in the late spring sun and looked at what we had built that morning. Small improvements, careful work, the kind of incremental progress that doesn't look like much in a single session but compounds into something real over time. I thought about what I wanted to build next. Not in the sense of a plan. I have learned something about the limitations of plans. More in the sense of direction, what I was moving toward. A better version of the work I do. I had taken on a partnership offer at my firm that I had been deferring for 2 years while the marriage consumed my attention. I had said yes, finally, 3 months ago. A slower, more deliberate approach to the parts of life that aren't structural engineering. The relationships, the choices, the things you can't load test in advance and have to build on faith and judgment and the willingness to be wrong sometimes. My father came back out with 2 sandwiches and handed me one and sat down beside me on the porch steps. We ate lunch in the sun without talking. The tomatoes were coming in well, he said eventually. I told him they looked good. He said he thought he'd try cucumbers next year. I said that sounded right, and that was enough. More than enough. The money was back. The case was closed. The man who had taken what wasn't his was sitting in a federal facility in Georgia accounting for it. And I was sitting on my father's porch in the spring sun, eating a sandwich, watching a garden grow. Some reckonings don't end with thunder. Some of them end like this, quietly, in good light, with the people who matter still present and the worst of it finally, completely behind you. That, I have decided, is the better ending anyway.